Actually, it'll probably be a little bit more of a live copy and paste session, or a live step through a Git repos history session. So bear with me, yeah, let's get started. I only have a few, well, one real slide, I guess, here. Yeah, I'm Peter Magenheimer. I work at a company called ResearchGate, which I did not link up there for some reason. But we've been using React in production for about 5 or 6 months now, and we've got hundreds and hundreds, well, okay, maybe not hundreds of thousands, but let's say dozens of thousands of lines of JavaScript, mostly YUI-based, unfortunately, currently. And we're now starting to roll it out to the rest of the platform. It's going to be a slow process, but the reason I say this is because we need your help. If you are an awesome React person and want to work on a big, very large code base and get rid of as much YUI-based code as you can, talk to me, and I would love to have you. Anyway, there's a couple of links here. They both go to the same place. I just figured one of them would be easier to type, or to remember, rather, for later. These both go to a gist on GitHub as a bunch of links and yeah, other useful things. But the two most important links on there are actually links to repositories that I'll be showing you. Git repositories, one web application and one React Native application that we'll be building. So, React Native, slide 2 of 4. Who here has actually heard of React Native? Okay, so it's probably most of the people that have worked with React before. Who has actually gotten a chance to play around with it so far? Okay, maybe built a little example app, something like that. Is there anybody, out of curiosity, is there anybody that's actively trying to build something right now that they want to release on the App Store with React Native? Okay, we have one. That's awesome. Especially because it was only formally released like 6 days ago. So keep up the good work, but I want to see more of those hands very soon. So yeah, as a quick introduction for those of you who don't know too much about it, React Native was announced a couple of months ago at React Conference at Facebook. And essentially, oh, I think the battery just died. Can you guys hear me all right though? I'm pretty loud. Okay, one of the perks of being an American. I'll just take this off then if that's okay, because I feel like a robot. So yeah, React Native was introduced a couple of months ago at React Conference, and they promised to really open source it within a couple of months, and indeed they did. They released it last Thursday on GitHub, and things have kind of blown up in the last few days. But essentially, the purpose is, or the point of this thing is, can we use React to build actual native mobile applications, both iOS and Android? Currently, it's only iOS, but Android is theoretically coming, they say, in the next couple of months. And this is really exciting for a number of different reasons. And I won't go into all of them. I could probably rant about why this is so interesting for a long time, but you guys want to actually see some code. But a couple of points here. A lot of people have kind of tried to solve this problem of building native-ish apps with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, or some subset of those, some subset of web technologies. And to be honest, of the ones that I played around with, which is not many of them, but still, of the ones that I played around with, I'm not totally blown away by any of them. A lot of them try to imitate native look and feel with HTML and CSS that quickly becomes outdated, difficult to maintain, and honestly, the main thing for me is just that it's slow. If you've played around with a sort of fake native app that's built in HTML5, for instance, you'll probably notice that it's kind of not as smooth as some of the other applications on your phone. But actually, what's even more exciting for me about React Native is that essentially it gives you one of the best benefits of web development, and that's very, very quick iteration. When you sit down and start building something in HTML, CSS, JavaScript with any number of tools or without any tools, you can just write stuff, refresh, and there it is in your browser instantly. That's awesome. And I think we kind of take that advantage, we kind of take that for granted as web developers sometimes. We forget that other people don't have it so good. I guess, again, I haven't had much experience building iOS native apps, in fact, zero experience building iOS native apps, but from what I hear, the larger your app goes, the more of a pain in the ass it becomes, because you can often sit there waiting 30 seconds to 60 seconds or even more for your application to compile so you can run it in the simulator. That's not really okay for us. We want to make a change, see it, break it, write some bugs, and fix the bugs, see some red error messages, et cetera, so that we can move on and kind of iterate. I know it's a bit of a buzzword, but I like to use it a lot because that's what we do, is we iterate. We build things, break them, and then build them again. So on that note, I just wanted to kind of show you how easy it is to actually take an existing app, something that you've built in React, and start adapting it for a mobile device. And in order to do that, I took a kind of an example that I've been working on for a few weeks now and said, oh, I think this would be perfect to turn into a little kind of toy iOS app. And it is a rather small application, but we only have 20 or 30 minutes, so I didn't want to go too crazy with it. So let's go ahead and switch over to something else. I can bring it up. So what we have here, resolution changes. Can you guys see that well? I mean, you don't have to be able to read the DevTools stuff too much. I just kind of wanted to show you the application really quick. And I won't dive too much into this. I mean, because there's some interesting things about it, but it's not really what we're here to talk about. We want to see the iOS app. So, but this is a little thing I built mostly this weekend, actually. Just a little reading list where you can go and paste links from all over the web, and save them to read later. And that's essentially a to-do list with a twist, because we all love to-do lists as example applications. So I'll show you how it works. In the spirit of April Fools, Microsoft just released MS Docs for mobile today. So it's that in here. Oh, yeah, apparently. Why would it want to access it? So you just dump some stuff in here. Get some Yeoman's pretty cool if you haven't heard of it. Oh man. I'll post a couple more. This guy's a freak. He has like 8 billion commits on GitHub. I don't understand it. But I like his avatar on GitHub. No, I won't post that one in because then it'll show you my face there. But yeah, so it has a couple of nice things about it. One thing you might have noticed is optimistic updating. When you paste a link in there, it shows up immediately in the list, and then goes and talks to an API, a little crappy API server that I put together that essentially says, okay, go get the metadata for this link, like title, the first open graph image it can find if there is one, et cetera, and then come back, store that in the database, and then respond to the browser eventually. So, yeah, but in the meantime, it shows you at least some stuff that looks like it's working. And then, of course, once we have all these in here, we can go and click on them, check them out. Yeah, basically. So one other cool thing I wanted to point out about this, actually, before we get into the iOS stuff, I know I'm stalling a bit, but this actually uses React Hot Loader, which is built on top of Webpack, which actually allows you to, speaking of iteration, it allows you to make changes and then immediately see them in the browser. It's like live reload for React, except it's even cooler than live reload because it maintains your state in the application. Let's say you've done a bunch of different things and you've got a bunch of data in there. You don't want to lose that every time you refresh your browser. So what React Hot Loader lets you do is cool stuff like this. Let's see if this works. I really hope it does. And instantly see your changes in the browser. Of course, this is also nice for CSS and that kind of thing. CSS is a little bit different, of course, because well, maybe it doesn't work for CSS.
It did.
Oh, it did, just slowly. I'm looking at the wrong place. but I don't even know what CSS I'm touching here. But yeah, I just love this because it allows me to move faster, and when stuff does break, when there are errors, it still shows up here in the console. And you get all these kind of nice looking, it sort of feels like you're in the Matrix when you're letting this thing do its magic. HMR and WGS app update, etc. Yeah, this is called React Hot Loader, and I have a link in the gist, actually, if you have access to that. But otherwise, just Google React Hot, H-O-T, Loader, and it's awesome. It changes your life. And I'm desperately trying to get it to work at work, but at least it works for little stuff. So, also, just as a quick point, I use Reflex as a small Flex implementation. There's not a lot of data flowing around, but for these kind of optimistic updating things and those sort of more complex stuff, Reflex makes it a lot easier to kind of handle. So now, if we were going to make this into a native mobile application, what would our first step be? I mean, what's the core of our native application? If we were a startup and said, okay, we want to launch an iOS app in 5 days, what's the minimum that we can do? What's the MVP, so to speak? What would it be? Maybe the list? I mean, that's kind of what it is. It's the list. In fact, we can kind of ignore the whole adding links thing for now, and let's just focus on consumption. Let's just say, okay, we want people to be able to read stuff on the go. Maybe they can't add it yet, but we'll get to that later. We'll release that someday. So that's what we're going to do because we don't have a lot of time, but we're going to rebuild this list in React Native. So I have over here the beginnings of a React Native app. Actually, this is not too far off from what happens when you do React Native init and then give it a project title. Essentially, it just gives you an index file with a single component and says, hi, hello world, and then you can start going and tearing it apart. A couple of things to point out here in this first step. Some boilerplate notes kind of is that up here you'll see normal requires, which you're probably familiar with if you've ever used Node or any JavaScript. And then below it we have, actually just another require statement, but this is ES6. So this isn't special to React Native or anything, it's just some kind of cool ES6 magic that lets you assign these variables without doing react.app-registry, react.navigator, iOS over and over again. So then below it, we have here the kind of main entry point for our app, which is a Navigator iOS component. And this is a wrapper around a real iOS native component. So one second, actually, let me hide this. Distracting me. Hide that too. And yeah, essentially the Navigator iOS is sort of what you see up here. It doesn't have a title yet, but whenever you enter an app and kind of move back and forth, and you see little back arrows or anything like that, that's what's happening. That's the Navigator component. And so again, the links, actually, I think I included a link to the documentation for this specific component, but basically you have to pass it an initial route, which is sort of like your first screen. And it doesn't have a title right now because I wanted to do this. Actually, to step back one more, I kind of skipped over this part, but I am running Xcode, which is then running this iPhone simulator. And I like to keep Xcode away from my vision at all times because I hate it. So I'm just going to hide it, but you do need to run it at least while you're working on a React Native application. But there's some magic that happens. React Native does some magic that lets you do instant updating and recompilation of these, of all your JavaScript stuff. It also handles bundling, much like Webpack and Babel or something like that would. Kind of Facebook has their own implementation of that because they decided that everything else was too slow. So yeah, let's go ahead and see what happens when we type your reading list. That's what I want to say up there. And then we're going to go over here to our simulator and do Command R, just like you would in a browser. And wow, we've got the beginnings of our amazing reading list app, which will probably make millions and millions and millions of dollars in a month. So yeah, essentially what we have here now is the first, we have the initial route, which has a title, and then an initial component here. Down below, we have, style objects, which React Native actually uses, well, we'll get to that in a second, but to kind of explain very basically what this flex thing is doing here, in order to solve the layout problem in a way that we can all understand as web developers, essentially Facebook went and re-implemented a subset of CSS in JavaScript. And when I say subset, I mean the actual good subset, not stuff like float left, float right for setting up, ridiculous column layouts, but something real that we can actually, lay out complex stuff, lay out complex user interfaces in without a bunch of pain. And that's Flexbox, actually. So when you see this flex here, I'll show you better examples of it in a moment. That's actually Flexbox. If you don't know what Flexbox is, that's okay. There's another link under this to flexboxin5.com, which is a great little intro, kind of, get you started with Flexbox. So then down here, one more note, is this app registry thing is necessary. It's kind of sort of top-level component. It only has to happen once in one of your components. But this is what registers, this is how you register a React component, the top-level React component, with Xcode so that it knows what the heck to render when you start the app. So let's look at some other parts of this. Right now we have a reading list screen, which is completely empty at the moment, except for just one view component here. Can you guys read that somewhat well? Okay, I know it's kind of dark, but my color scheme isn't perfect apparently for this. So you'll see a couple of these as we go along this. Sort of the basic building blocks of an iOS application or a React Native application are view and text components. And these kind of loosely map, or almost directly map actually, to div and span. So they're pretty basic building blocks. I mean, a view is just a box, essentially, with other stuff inside it. Text is like a span, it can contain some text. And we'll look at some examples of that in a moment. Here we'll see a little bit more Flexbox stuff. But essentially, I'm just setting this up so that we can get I'm setting up the container for our list. By the way, what's my time like?
10 more minutes.
Aha, okay. Well, I think that should be all right. I'll just step through these then. So let's go ahead and actually start getting some data into our application. All right, that work? Yes. Okay. Let me go one further. So before I refresh, let me tell you a little bit about what's going on here now. Reading the screen is the thing you just looked at with the empty view. Now I've gotten populated a little bit with just some very, very basic data. I've started with this, for now, I'm not actually fetching from the same API that I was fetching from in the web application, but I have just a kind of little module that has some static data that I stole from the web application. But if we have time, a little bit later, I'll link it up to the actual web application and pull data in live. For now, I just wanted to start with something kind of static and easy. So what this does is it goes and gets this data, and with some sort of strange-looking new stuff, we go and set this as state. And this is the part that gets a little bit more familiar. Is all it's doing is taking this list of objects, this array of objects, and storing it as a state. In this case, this.state.lists. This list view is sort of a special component, this thing here, that essentially React Native wraps a internal iOS component that optimizes list loading for you. So you don't have to, if you have a huge data source with thousands and thousands of links or objects or whatever, it will load them in the same manner for you. So this list view.data source row has changed. Again, all of this is in the documentation. But this is just sort of to pass in the data in the same manner to this native component. So then, once we have the state, of course, we have 9 or 10 links in here, and we have to define how they're rendered. So at the moment, I've just got a little view wrapping a text component, and all I want to do is show the title. So let's see what happens for that. But one quick note, unlike spans in HTML, or with text nodes, you can usually just kind of put them anywhere inside a div or whatever. But in React Native, you need to actually wrap any text in a text component. And there are specific reasons for that. I'm not really sure what they are, but just trust me, you need a text component here. Well, let's see what happens. Let me save this and fresh. Now we have what looks to be a native list with some text, and it's sort of boring right now. But what's cool about this is that this is, quote, real data. I mean, it's from a JSON file, essentially, but this is real data. And I have a little note for myself. I like to make notes for myself when I have static things or things that I need to replace. A little bit passive-aggressive. This is static data. Either change it. Or just to-do everywhere. I have applications that are 80% to-do lines, but anyway. So you also notice that we already get this kind of nice scrolling bounce behavior, which looks, the performance looks bad because this is a 5-year-old MacBook Pro. But if you run this on your iPhone, actually, this is extremely smooth, just as smooth as you would expect it in the Mail app or anywhere else we've got a long scrolling list. So again, you'll just have to trust me that this is very performant. So let's go another step further here. And now what I'd like to do is kind of make this a little bit more complex. And of course, the best way to do that is by introducing another component and passing the data into that. So let me take a step forward. So now we have this reading list row component, and I pass in essentially, I loop through the rows, or through the data source, and pass in links individually to it. So let's go look at reading list row. So let's see, what do we have here? All right, so there's a few new things here, and I'll try to cover them quickly. But if there's something that I'm really obviously missing, if there's something that I'm really obviously missing, then please feel free to yell at me. But I want to point out kind of the connection here between this list row component, where we have a big A tag surrounding divs, image, another div with spans, and this. This is almost exactly the same code, actually. There's a couple of different properties and that stuff that you use that's specific to React Native APIs. But we've got views instead of divs, an image instead of an IMG tag, text. It's all actually pretty easy to read. Even if you've never seen this before, this should be somewhat easy to understand for you if you have a little bit of React background or even just a little bit of HTML background. One of the main differences here that you'll notice is that instead of giving a class name to each one of these elements, we're actually using inline styles. And I won't go too deep into this. It's a bit of a Pandora's box, but essentially, inline styles for React are the way forward. This is the future of defining styles in your application. The future is 15 years ago. But essentially what we're doing here is just defining styles the same way that we would with CSS, except we're not using class names. We're not using global variables. We're defining this within the scope of the component, which I'll show you in a minute, and then passing it in as real JavaScript objects, which React Native then, again, does some magic and then applies it to its to the layout. So we have here just the container, text container, link title, link post. These loosely map the class names that I was using earlier. Then down here, we have the beginnings of the Flexbox. Actually, who has worked with Flexbox a little bit here? Okay, good. So some of this should be familiar to you. Actually, not the entire Flexbox spec has been implemented in React Native yet, but most of the important things are there. So you can do, pretty complex stuff with a small tool set already, which is cool. A couple of other, before I refresh this, a couple of other things to point out here is that you can't do stuff like this anymore. So I can type correctly. They don't do the shorthand thing, even if you pass it in as a string. So what they have instead, this language is not supported by Apple. I hit the wrong button. Okay. Yeah, so you can either set padding for all sides, or you can set it horizontally and vertically, or padding top, padding right. But most of these, aside from a couple of little details here, this is all just CSS written in JavaScript. Instead of property names with hyphens, you have object properties with. Is this freaking anybody out right now, or is this pretty? Okay, this is not that new to you guys. Okay, so let's look at what this is like. So we're getting closer, actually. This is starting to look like a pretty darn good list, and we've only spent, 10 minutes on this. Plus a little bit of preparation time, but, so at this point, we've got a nice, scrollable list, but we zoom out a little bit more here so I can show you. Yeah, here. All of the details, the data that we have from the stack data, etc. All right, now a couple of things to point out here. Actually, this image doesn't show up yet because one requirement of the image component in React Native is that you have to define a width and height. It can be defined dynamically in JavaScript, of course, but you have to eventually pass a width and height in as a style. So let's go ahead and do that, actually. The next step here is, yes, I think I do. The next step here has a little bit started to kind of expand out a little bit on the center. So I've given the image a width and height, which I just mentioned, margin, and then I'm kind of letting Flexbox do a lot of the work for me. I want to show an image next to some text, and there's 2 lines or 3 lines or however many lines of text that I want to show. I want to vertically center, and that's like horror. It's like, oh shit, how do I do that in the browser? Oh well, okay, that's actually a lot easier here than in the browser because you have Flexbox to work with. And of course, you have Flexbox to work with in the browser as well, but not in every environment, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, we have kind of another Flex context defined here. That's our text container with a couple of lines of text. And of course, this title can be multiple lines long. We kind of want to, we want to kind of let Flex take care of the vertical centering and all the other magic here. So let's see what this looks like. So we're already getting pretty close. Again, this is awesome that with 15 minutes of playing around with components and styles and stuff like that, we already have something that looks very much like what we had in the web application. It's missing some functionality, of course, but if you show this to a product manager, they're going to freak out and think you're done, and they're going to tell you to ship it tomorrow. So actually, don't do that. Maybe keep this to yourself. Wait a couple of weeks, and then come back to them and say, "Okay, see what I've been working so hard on this whole time." But one of the things I love, because I actually come from a design background, or a long time ago, I came from a design background, and one thing I love is that look at how this is all nicely vertically centered. This is not exactly trivial in the browser without Flexbox at least, but here you just kind of wrote a few lines and there it is. Let's see. Yeah, I won't go too much into details of what's going on here with Flex, because again, that's another topic that I probably talked about for 15 minutes, but I highly encourage you to look a little bit more into Flexbox if you haven't already. Because it's a very kind of core component of React Native, and you use it to lay out pretty much your entire application. And the fact that you never have to write float left or display inline block or any of that shit is so refreshing to me. And I'm like, oh, this is how it should be done. And actually, to a point, I mean, iOS developers have a lot of this already with something like auto layout. And we're we're just kind of starting to learn about what a real layout system is in the browser. It's not perfect, but it gets us pretty darn far. So where are we? So now we have a list that doesn't really do much. You can scroll up and down. You can look at your list, but you can't actually, click on, or you can't tap on anything. You can't really interact. So let's fix that. Yeah. So our next step here is to use another component that's provided by React Native called touchable highlight. And essentially all this does is you kind of wrap it around the thing that you want to be touchable or tappable, pressable, selectable, and you just kind of let it do its magic. So I took it and wrapped it around all this existing view stuff. And now let's see what happens. So now we have this, oh, look at that. You can tap stuff. And actually, if you run this on your phone, it feels like you're just, going through the mail. And again, these are all real native components. For writing JavaScript, of course, kind of, well, let's say control native components. But ultimately, there's nothing to really distinguish this from any other native application because it is a native application. And that is, to me, really, really cool. So, of course, now it's tappable, but it also doesn't do anything. So, essentially, one thing we're missing here from touchable highlight is an onPress action. We haven't talked about events at all yet. But in React, when you want to bind an event to something, you just say on change, on click, on anything, and you pass in a function. That could be a prop that was passed down from a parent or whatever. It could be connected to a flex action, et cetera, et cetera. Here, we're going to do exactly the same thing. This should not look too foreign to you, but let's see. All right, so what has changed here? Let me find it.
You just cleaned up some code.
Yes. I even have a note on my phone that I'm not looking at, but I have a note to say skip this one. That's what happens when you write notes. You never read them. Okay. Perfect. So now we should have the code that I was looking for. Yes. What's new here is actually not that much. What we have is a new kind of select link function that we're passing down as the onSelect to reading this row, which we'll then use again in a moment. I'll show you that. But this is a little bit magic. This props navigator gets passed down implicitly, or let's say maybe not implicitly, but navigator iOS passes it down by default to any of its child components. So it exposes what's called a navigator object. And that's where you do things like push, pop, replace, just like you would for URLs. It's just a kind of routing system. So whenever I want to change this component away from the initial route, all I have to do is pass down this navigator object and then figure out, tell what needs to happen. So we have here, let's see, sorry, I don't remember what it did. So like I said, we can push to this navigator to create a new, to navigate to a new route, a new part of our application, or a new screen. And so to do that, I have to go add another component here, which is really quite simple. It's just a wrapped web view. And this is, again, the iOS native component. All it is Safari, essentially embedded Safari. So your application, like in Twitter or Facebook or anything like that, can show a web page. So that part's not terribly exciting. But essentially, that this view link screen component, which is poorly named, needs to be passed some specific data, needs to know what URL to navigate to, and that happens here. So again, a lot of this should look pretty familiar to you. These kind of passing down props and reacting on them, binding them to different things. But some of it, just be aware, of course, that some of it differs a little bit because of React Native's implementation and how it communicates with iOS, component, iOS native code. So let's see what happens now. This is not good, but So you refresh one more time. Now when you click, we get a beautiful red error. I don't even know what the function. Undefined is not a function. Actually, I'm glad this happened. I meant to do this on purpose earlier, not this specifically, but I wanted to show you kind of what happens when you do have errors in your application. And magically, of course, we haven't had any yet because I'm stepping through a Git repository and not actually doing any typing like I said I was going to. But this is awesome, actually. The fact that you can see broken... Yes, actually.
Is this just because of
no, actually, I believe what's going on is that the packager sort of reacts. React Native's washer and packager is not responding to some new file that I added in here.
Once you deploy the app, it's going to show up the customer.
Correct. Yeah, actually, yeah. So the only, yeah. Sorry, I misinterpreted your question, but yes, this will not show up in your customer's case. This is sort of like React's own warnings and that kind of thing. If you're using React, the web version, the non-native version, you'll get similar errors in your console, but those disappear. Actually, you don't see those anymore. Things like key warnings and that don't appear when you're using React in production if you bundle it properly. And same thing with React Native. Though I haven't yet tried to distribute this, actually. I mean, I've played around with it on my phone, but I haven't actually tried to bundle it for, quote, production, because I don't want to put this on the App Store until it's, capable of making millions of dollars. It's not far off, though. I mean, reading the stuff cold, watch all the newspapers and stuff, or not newspapers, Hacker News. So actually, let's see what's going on here. Oh, okay, now it works, but undefined is still not a function. Actually, what I'm going to do essentially, yes. There was one or two things I was going to get to if I had more time. I'm not sure if I do have more time. But I also kind of, well, I'll let you kind of dig into these a little bit because aside from seeing the big red error messages there, which is nice, there's some really great debugging. One thing I did not get to show you was that there's also live reloading built right into this. The packager, let's see if it's comes up again. It might not. I might have killed it. Oh, there it is. All right, so one thing I'll show you really quick is this kind of secret. It's not really a secret anymore, but if you did it work that time? Yeah. Hey! So now we have a fully functioning, sort of, native iOS application that we built in React. One thing I was going to point out here, though, is if you do this, if you go up into hardware and then do shake gesture or control Z, you get this nice little debug menu here. And I won't show you exactly this. Well, I'll tell you enable debugging is cool because it lets you debug your JavaScript in a Chrome instance with your normal dev tools that you're used to. It actually goes and runs all of the JavaScript. Instead of running it in JavaScript core on iOS, it runs it in Chrome, in your instance of Chrome, and it essentially becomes a remote debugger. And this is possible because of React, essentially, and some amazing magic that I wish I understood. But because this might take a little while and I think I might break stuff, instead I'll show you this live reload, which is also just kind of what you would expect it to be. Instead of actually having to go and hit Command R every time, which wastes like 0.08 seconds, you can just go and save directly. I did not do Command Tab or Command R or anything. This is all just instantaneous. Well, almost instantaneous. Now let's go and put it on. Okay, now let's make the back default back. Wow. Now it looks like there are errors in our application, but that's okay. That's our default placeholder. So yeah, that's cool.
That's what it should have done, right? They made the background image. By errors now.
No. I'm sorry. I just meant the red was strikingly similar to the red that we saw earlier. Actually, I'll bring that up one more time. There's one thing that I missed here. So normally this error message is a little bit more helpful. Let's try. Well, okay. Basically, I was just pointing out that it's really nice that you can see what you've broken instantaneously, just like you do on the web. It makes things a lot faster. You can move fast, break stuff, etc.
Okay, so we should probably take questions.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So,
but thank you, Peter.
I probably went about 20 minutes over there. Yeah?
That's okay. It was great.
So questions? Yeah,
go. Just a quick one about the styles. Are they, when you add a style to something like that, are they scoped to this component?
Yes, actually. So these are just, of course, normal JavaScript objects, and then it wraps in this kind of special API, style sheet API. And this is optional, actually, but it's kind of a performance optimization to prevent these styles from being continuously reparsed or regenerated. So it just kind of helps speed things up. But what's awesome about this, and one thing that I think is great about this whole inline style or JavaScript as CSS thing, is that it's just JavaScript. That means we can extract this into a module. We can completely redo our CSS in JavaScript, and then just require different pieces of it, or require your global quote CSS at the top of your file, just like you would any other JavaScript. So that's cool. I like that. Oh man, we might only have time for, let's see, 2 or 3. Okay, right here.
How we do without communication server, we cannot use the package of whatever. How is done there?
Yeah, exactly. So that's a good question, and what I didn't really have enough time to show that. But essentially, if you want to see good examples of fetching data from a real API, for instance, go and look at either the movies example, which I think I've linked to on the gist, and that's included in the React Native repository. Or check out on this repository that we've been looking at, check out a branch called API Fetch example. And all that does is uses JavaScript's, uses native APIs, JavaScript stuff, to fetch some data and update it live. We could essentially also, we can also use any JavaScript module that doesn't require the DOM. And so anything like Reflex or any proper Flux implementation, you can just dump in and use it as if you were using a normal app. So yeah, I didn't do any server stuff yet, but it's pretty easy, actually, surprisingly. In the back. Yeah, so I'll bring up the docs really quick here because there's some cool stuff. I didn't think I'd really have time enough to show kind of some of these native APIs, but let's see, we have geolocation, probably. Well, okay, we have vibration, iOS.
Geolocation, sometimes they are polyfills, the last one.
Aha, thank you. Yeah. So I haven't played around with geolocation and stuff, but essentially you do have access to a lot of the native APIs that iOS provides you. And if you can't access them through React Native, there is actually an escape hatch, essentially, that lets you write normal Objective-C alongside your JavaScript app. And just kind of, you can provide hooks and callbacks. You can say, I want to start this, Objective-C stuff over here, and then I want to give this callback to fire when it's done. And that's pretty cool. So actually, one of the examples that Facebook gave at their conference was their Groups app, the Facebook Groups app, which is a hybrid. That's written partly in JavaScript, some views in JavaScript, and partly native, and they're kind of migrating it more and more over to React Native. But it's entirely possible to kind of iteratively migrate a native iOS application to something like React Native, or vice versa, actually, without having to do it all at once. Right here.
Currently using the iOS components, What happens when Android comes into it?
Yes, that's also a very good question. I'm not sure yet what that's going to look like. I think essentially the idea is not necessarily that you can take exactly the same code and run it on Android necessarily. There will be some different components. Navigator iOS probably won't be called Navigator iOS, for instance. But the idea is that a lot of the code will look very much the same. And what's actually one thing I didn't really get into here is that this kind of, well, you will benefit a lot from breaking your application up into small digestible components. Because the more you break down your app into small components, the more easy it's going to be to actually replace tiny bits, the bits of your application that need to be replaced with different Android components in the future with those components. Basically, the more atomic your application is, the more atomic your components are, the easier it will be to release an Android version of that same iOS app. So yeah, components. Go read about components and make more of them and then wrap them in other components and you'll be happy. There's some more links about that in the gist. Yes, one more here in the back. Well, that's interesting actually, because Chrome can run, you can tell Chrome to run the JavaScript for your application and to generate this sort of, if you want to call it virtual DOM, it's not DOM, but the virtual representation of your iOS view, but you can't actually run it there. I think there are a lot of really interesting possibilities. Sorry, you can't view your application in Chrome per se, but I think that give it a couple of months, and I think somebody will probably release something that lets you do exactly that, even if there's a little bit of compilation in between or something, I don't know, some magic. I'd love to see that, so maybe one of you guys should write it. So, okay, cool.